In this series of videos, I'm going to talk about the changes that are coming in this year to the curriculum. I'll explain the rationale for these changes, and there'll be a question and answer session at the end based on questions that were raised in a similar presentation that I gave yesterday. If you have any additional questions or queries, you can address them to your coordinators, and you can also drop me or my colleague Hafiz a line in the curriculum unit. I will put up our contact details at the end of this series of videos. In the first video, I'm going to go over some of the core curriculum components and some of the terminology we use to describe our curriculum. This is primarily for the benefit of new faculty joining us this year. Old hands will already be familiar with the terms I'm going to use, so feel free to sort of fast forward through large parts of this section if you're familiar with it. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how the changes that we're bringing in this year were decided upon, the decision-making process, and that's going to be the content of the first video. The components of our curriculum can be described in terms of three umbrellas. The umbrellas represent course goals, course objectives, and SLOs. SLO stands for Student Learning Outcome. So what do these three components, or what are they? What does it mean? Course goals. Here are the course goals for the 4 levels in the foundation year. This is level 101, level 102, level 103, level 104. They are essentially the level of proficiency that students are expected to have attained by the end of the course. They are very general statements about the level of proficiency of the students. And they are expressed in terms of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Beginner, basic user. So students doing our 101 course would be expected by the end of the course to have reached a level of A1 on the CEFR. And in terms of the sort of language and functions that they can perform, they should be generative language users, should be able to interact in a very simple and basic way, asking and answering simple questions, giving personal information, for example, and performing very, very basic transactions in shops or cafes. Moving to level 102, upon completion of this course, learners should have reached CEFR A2 level. They should be a basic user, and they should have, in addition to all of this, have developed some social language functions. Level 103, the pre-intermediate, using a pre-intermediate course book, they should have reached, by the end of the course, low B1. So they should be at the bottom band of the independent user band on CEFR. So they should have, in addition to this, they should have developed conversational skills. They should be able to express ideas, opinions, deal with problems and situations where some unpredictable language is met as well. So they should be able to use various repair strategies, ask for clarification, guess the meaning of unknown vocabulary from context, infer meaning to some extent, to a limited extent. 104, the intermediate course book, using Headway Intermediate. The learners, by the end of 104 and by the end of the foundation year, should be higher independent users of language. So they should be at the top end of the B1 band on the CEFR. So in addition to what they're able to do at 103, they should also be able to not only give opinions, but give reasons and explanations for their opinions, and plans. They should describe experiences and events in some detail. But as you can see, these are general statements. Course goals are supported by course objectives. The course objectives are the ingredients of the course goals, if you like. These are the course objectives on the screen here of our level 101 course, the first level in the foundation year. Each objective covers one of the 4 communication skills: reading, listening, speaking, writing, and there is a 5th objective which refers to linguistic knowledge. So it's called use of English, so it's lexicogrammar, basically. And 60% of the assessment, the final grade of students on the course, is based on their performance in mid and end of module exams, and a large component of those exams is the use of English section. So they are assessed on that through formal exams. But there are other components, continuous assessment components, that assess student performance in the other skills, and I'll talk about them in one of the later videos. So we've talked about course goals. I've shown an example of course objectives. I'm now going to move on to SLOs, student learning outcomes. Here is a definition of SLOs, what an SLO is. Essentially, SLOs are the individual aims of individual lessons or a series of lessons. They are a tool to guide instruction, to guide lesson planning from lesson to lesson. These would be the first port of call, if you like, when you're thinking about planning lessons for a week. What SLOs do I have to cover? What do the learners have to be able to do with the language? Far more detailed and specific than the course objectives, which are more general statements about student level of performance in each skill. SLOs break up the objectives into detailed, specific parts. So again, if we just go back up to our umbrellas, the SLOs are the ingredients of the course objectives. They support the course objectives. The course objectives are the ingredients of the course goals. They support the course goals. Hence, 3 different sizes of umbrella. Now, these questions are really for our returning instructors. Maybe people who taught with us last year can just think about these questions for a moment and see if they can figure out the answer, and then I'll give you the answer and I'll explain. So if you focus on these 2 statements here. What are these in our curriculum? What are they called? What is the difference between them, and what are they for? So, returning instructors, just think about that for a minute. Okay. So, the first one is an SLO. It's a student learning outcome. The second one is a student can-do statement. In our curriculum, we have student learning outcomes written for instructors. These are what instructors use to guide instruction, to help them to plan their lessons, to know what the aims of lessons are, what the learners need to be able to do, what the ultimate target of a particular lesson is. You'll notice that the language here is more complex than the language here. And also these student learning outcomes tend to be more specific and precise than the can-do statements. The reason for that is that the can-do statements are intended for students. They are a tool to be used for self-reflection on learning, for the learners to track their own progress through the course. Students will actually get a chance to self-assess against all the can-do statements in the course, assess how well they know or can do each of these things, and which ones they need further support and practice, further support with and practice in. And they can also be used by instructors for academic counselling. So, two different audiences basically. So, instructors should not be using this with their students. They should not be showing this to their students. The language is going to be too complex for them. They're not going to, our students are not ELT professionals, so they don't, they may struggle with some of the terminology. It's not intended for students. It's intended for instructors as, to help them to plan instruction. What should be used with the students? Can-do statements. Now, the can-do statements this year have been slightly amended from last year because of the fact that some of the SLOs from last year have been amended. I'll talk more about how a little bit later in a later video. The thing is, these are not yet finalised. They are in the process of being finalised, the can-do statements. They should be ready by the end of this week, and they will be on the KAU website for everybody to consult. The student learning outcomes have been finalised, and they will be on the KAU website shortly. Now, the student learning outcomes in many cases now correlate. There's a one-to-one match between a learning outcome and a can-do statement. But there isn't always a one-to-one match. Sometimes there might be a student learning outcome that has two can-do statements that go with it. So we're producing a document which will show which can-do statements match which learning outcomes. Students will receive a document just with the can-do statements, which they can use to self-assess, as I mentioned earlier. Another key term that you need to be familiar with if you're new to the ELI is pacing guides. These are documents that you will consult a lot in your time with us. Pacing guides are a tool for curriculum guidance. They focus on the achievement of student learning outcomes. All of the student learning outcomes for a level are included in the pacing guide for that level, as are the course objectives for that level. The pacing guides show which learning outcomes need to be achieved and which content needs to be covered each week of the course. So they are a roadmap, if you like, for instruction over the course of the module. Another thing that the pacing guides contain is a list of coursebook pages and resources to be covered. The coursebook we use at the ELI is New Headway Plus Special Edition. Level 101, we use the beginner book. Level 102, we use the elementary book. 103, we use the pre-intermediate book. And the final level, 104, we use intermediate. Our courses are fairly short and intensive, only 7 weeks. So we do not cover every unit of each course book. We cover selected units. The details are all in the pacing guide about what units need to be covered. In addition, there is a reference to additional practice activities in the workbook, and of course instructors are encouraged to adapt resources, create their own materials and resources, use any appropriate supplementary materials. The pacing guides are designed to allow for practice and, as I mentioned, incorporation of supplementary materials to facilitate SLO achievement. This is the guiding principle for instruction throughout the module, the achievement of the student learning outcomes. So these are the aims of the lessons you'll be delivering, and so you need to work backwards from them. Learner training is also emphasised. At the end of each pacing guide, there are a set of learner training targets. Students need ongoing support and guidance so that they can use various learning strategies and so that they're able to get the most out of the course. Now I'm going to show you an example of a pacing guide. This is the pacing guide for level 102, the level where we use Headway Elementary. It's a rather lengthy document, but it contains a lot of very useful information. This is available on the ELI website under Teaching Resources, and I would encourage you all to read through this carefully before teaching begins, and if you have any questions about anything, please approach your coordinator or feel free to email the curriculum unit and we'll try to answer them for you. The pacing guide contains, as I mentioned earlier, the course goal for the level, the course objectives, and the student learning outcomes, which I'll come on to in a second. It also has descriptions of what some of these curricular elements are some definitions of some of the terms that I mentioned earlier. So there's the definition for student learning outcomes, information about can-do statements. I would also like to draw the attention of all faculty, not only people who've just joined us this year, to this section. This has been added this year. There are some changes that have occurred to the curriculum and to the student learning outcomes for this year. And this section, guidance on using this pacing guide, explains in some detail how the information and the student learning outcomes are organised in the pacing guide. This will help you to navigate through the pacing guide and to stay on track. So please do read through this before you start reading the pacing guide. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to email us or pop in to our office. But before you do that, because we are extremely busy in this office as well, of course, so please do make sure you read this first. Okay, thank you. The guidance section also includes details about the 4 continuous assessment components of this year's curriculum. And so there is some general information here about these components. I will be talking about each of these components in more detail in a later video. Here is some information about potential sources of supplementary materials compatible with the Oxford University Press Headway Plus Special Edition series. So if you're looking for some supplementary materials, you want your students to do some practice activities for consolidation, you can refer to this. And then the next section gives information on how the student can-do statements can be used both to for learners to self-assess and track their progress, for instructors to use in academic counselling sessions with students, and for instructors to use to frame the objectives of a lesson for their learners, to present the objectives of an individual lesson. And now we move on to the main part, starting at on page 7 of the pacing guide. After all of that information, this is the meat, if you like, of the pacing guide. Week 1, Unit 2. So you'll notice, as I mentioned earlier, not every unit of the course book is covered. Headway Elementary, the Level 102 course, Unit 1 is not covered because it's essentially revision of what was covered at Level 101. Because it's such an intensive programme, students study for 7 weeks, have a 1-week break, and then they're on to the next level. So it was felt that this could be dispensed with. We start from Unit 2. So do make sure you consult your pacing guide carefully, check which units you need to cover. These are listed each week, so if you follow this, you shouldn't have any problems. Okay, let me talk you through what is in the pacing guide each week. At the top is the student learning outcome that needs to be covered. Can provide and ask for information on personal details. For example, family, educational background, job possessions, and what people do at work and in free time. That is the learning outcome, the first learning outcome. The coursebook materials that need to be covered to support this are listed here. Students' book, page 12 to 13, and workbook, extra practice activities there. And in addition, for the productive skills, for speaking and writing, we've included the key language points that need to be covered. This can also be found just by looking at the course book, page 12 and 13, looking at the student's book, but also this reference might be useful for you when you're planning your lessons. If you look at the second cell, you will notice here that there are two SLOs. You can scan a short, simple text to identify specific relevant information pertaining to people, routines, pastimes, and places. This is a reading outcome, obviously. So the other thing, the course objective that each individual learning outcome supports is listed. So you know whether it's reading, listening, speaking, writing, or use of English. You can see here, number 1, that is reading. If you're confused by these figures, just scroll up to the top again, the top of the document. You'll see the 5 course objectives. For every level, objective 1 is reading, objective 2 is listening, objective 3 is speaking, objective 4 writing, objective 5 use of English. That's the same for every level. So just refer back to this if you can't remember which number it is. If we look at the second student learning outcome, you'll see, as I said before, there are 2 learning outcomes here for pages 16 and 17. Second one can write short, simple emails, etc., etc. So we have a reading learning outcome and a writing learning outcome. They are grouped together because like many course books on the market, New Headway Plus Special Edition is an integrated skills course. So if we turn to pages 16 and 17, what do the learners have to do here? First of all, they have to do an activity where they're scanning the text for specific information to determine whether these facts are true or false. So that pertains to this SLO. Then, after they've done this, there's a follow-up activity, write an email about your class. So this pertains to this SLO. Another thing I should point out, and this is one of the changes that has come in this year, the number of student learning outcomes this year has been reduced from what it was last year. And one of the problems last year was that we had, and this came out in our curriculum evaluation, we had 4 or 5 SLOs listed for week 1. So they did this, they did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. Finished. And then the learners moved on. Week 2, they did a whole new set of learning outcomes. There was new content. They were expected to acquire new skills. And then week 3, new content again, new SLOs. This does not reflect how language learning occurs, of course. It's not a checklist. It's not a case of, okay, I've looked at this in a couple of lessons, I've practiced it, I've learnt it, move on, and that's done. There needs to be constant recycling, practice, consolidation, extension, and it's not a linear process, learning a language. So that was a major drawback of last year's pacing guides. We've attempted to address that this year by reducing the number of SLOs and repeating SLOs at various points over the 7 weeks of the course. Where an SLO is listed in purple, this is an SLO that has already been covered earlier in the course. It's being repeated. There may be some extension, there may be some more language that's being learnt, some new language, but essentially it's the same SLO. Also, it's listed in brackets afterwards where in the course the SLO occurred previously. So this one can provide and ask for information on personal details, family, educational background, job possessions, and what people do at work and in free time. That was in Unit 2, and it's repeated again in Unit 3. This also reflects the nature of the course book, because the course book recycles content and language unit to unit as well. Another thing I should point out is that here you'll see that the course objectives supported, well, there are 2 of them, 3 and 5. The reason for this is for the productive skills, very often you're going to have both of these, because 5 is use of English. It's language, knowledge, which is essential, of course, to be able to produce language. This is, so you're very often going to see 3 and 5, speaking and use of English, or 4 and 5, writing and use of English together, because they're inseparable, of course. Okay, what else do I need to tell you about the pacing guide? I'm going to talk very briefly about this. I'll go into more detail in a later video. Assignments. This refers to the continuous assessment elements of the course. These are listed at the end of each week. These assignments need to be completed with the class in the week. Speaking formative assessment and exam preparation, reading program, learning management system. These need to occur in week 2. In week 3, writing continuous assessment, part 1, part 2, reading program, lesson 1, and speaking formative assessment and exam preparation. Don't worry about what all of that means at this stage. As I say, I'll be going into some detail about those elements in a later video. First of all, thank you. Thank you to everybody who was involved in or contributed to the curriculum evaluation last academic year. It was a major effort, it was a lot of work, and we got a lot of very, very useful data from it, from our instructors, from you, and from our students as well. So, the first thing I want to say is the information you gave us, the suggestions you made, the opinions you expressed, your input played a major part in determining what the curriculum looks like for this academic year. I'm just going to talk you through the process, the decision-making process. So, after we got the data from the curriculum evaluation, we in the curriculum unit analysed it. We identified main issues that came out of the evaluation. Now you will appreciate that with over 400 instructors across 5 campuses, this is a huge operation, and there is a huge variety of opinion about the curriculum and about what needs to be done, how best to proceed. So your input has played an important part in the decision-making process, but obviously not all of your suggestions have been taken on board. There are other stakeholders in the process involved as well. There are logistical constraints, other constraints imposed externally, for example, university policies, and it was never going to, this is what I said last year to all of you who participated in focus groups and completed the surveys online. This is what I said to you last year. We will definitely listen to what you have to say, and it will be discussed at length. We can't guarantee that everything you think needs to be done, or everything you suggest will be implemented. But some of your suggestions certainly have been implemented for this academic year. So thank you very much for all of your input. Having analysed the data, identified the main issues across the 5 campuses, we then brought this to the attention of the curriculum committee, and we discussed the findings at length and the suggestions that you made. Out of that, a joint proposal was put together by the testing unit and the curriculum unit. We then went back to the curriculum committee and the assessment committee, and we presented the proposal. It was discussed. It was then amended in light of that discussion, and then it was resubmitted and agreed upon by all of the members of the 2 committees. Finally, it was submitted to the ELI Council, which is the final sort of decision-making sort of body in this process, and it was approved. And so now we are here, implementation. Okay, that is the end of this film. Thank you very much for watching. In the next video, I'll be going through some of the changes in detail. The first thing I'll be talking about is the curriculum documentation and how it has changed from last year. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.